history's most dangerous empire, had no king and no royal family. It wasn't even an empire. It was a corporation. The name was Dutch East India Company, better known as the VOC.
At the beginning of the 17th century,
Europe couldn't get enough of Asian spices. Pepper, cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon. These weren't just seasonings. They were worth fortunes. Dutch merchants rushed east, each hoping to control the lucrative spice trade. But instead of defeating their foreign rivals, they were destroying each other's profits. The competition became so fierce that the Dutch Republic stepped in. In 1602, it merged the rival trading companies into one, the Verenigde Oostindische Compagnie, better known as the VOC. Investors bought shares, merchants planned new voyages. On paper, it looked like an ordinary trading company. It wasn't. Hidden inside its charter were powers no company had ever possessed. The VOC wasn't just allowed to trade. Its charter gave it powers normally reserved for sovereign nations. It could build forts, raise armies, declare war, negotiate treaties with foreign rulers, govern overseas territories, and even mint its own coins. No corporation before or since has ever wielded such extraordinary authority. In many parts of Asia, the VOC didn't simply do business, it ruled. And with those powers, profit was no longer enough. The company wanted complete control over the spice trade. There was only one obstacle left: the people already living there. The Banda Islands were the only place on Earth where nutmeg naturally grew. In Europe, this tiny spice was worth a fortune. Whoever controlled Banda controlled one of the most valuable trades in the world. But the Bandanese refused to sell exclusively to the VOC. Instead, they traded freely with anyone willing to pay. English merchants, Asian traders, whoever offered the best price. To the VOC, free trade was the problem. Monopoly was the goal. In 1621, Governor-General Jan Pieterszoon Coen made his decision. The Banda Islands would be taken by force. The invasion was swift, resistance collapsed. But victory wasn't enough. J.P. Coen wanted complete control over the nutmeg trade. To achieve it, the Bandanese had to disappear. In 1621, thousands were killed. Many others were deported or fled their homeland forever. Entire communities vanished. The islands that once thrived with free trade fell silent. To keep the nutmeg plantations running, the VOC imported enslaved laborers from across the region. The monopoly was complete, and the profits were enormous. The gamble had worked. The Banda Islands were under Dutch control, and for the first time, the Dutch East India Company controlled nearly every nutmeg that reached Europe. For decades, the profits were staggering. Ship after ship sailed from Asia, carrying spices worth fortunes. Amsterdam flourished. Investors celebrated. The company that had begun as a bold trading venture had become the wealthiest corporation the world had ever known. But monopolies are expensive to maintain. Across Asia, the VOC built forts, stationed armies, and maintained a fleet that stretched across 2 oceans. Corruption spread through its ranks. Wars drained its treasury. Smuggling weakened its grip on the spice trade. And as nutmeg became easier to obtain elsewhere, the monopoly that had once made the company rich slowly began to lose its value. The empire built on spices was beginning to crumble. After nearly 2 centuries of dominating global trade, the Dutch East India Company was drowning in debt. In 1799, the company was dissolved. The richest corporation the world had ever seen was gone.
But the story didn't end there. When the Dutch East India Company disappeared, its empire did not. The trading posts, the forts, the armies, and the vast territories it had built across the East were taken over by the Dutch state. A company had vanished, but in its place, an empire was born. And that empire would rule Indonesia for the next century and a half. But that's a story for another time.